It started with a sound outside my window. Not loud, not sudden, just enough to make me pause mid-sentence and look up. At first I assumed it was a delivery truck, or maybe a neighbor moving something near the fence. But the sound didn't match that. It was slower, deliberate, like footsteps on gravel. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just a few inches. That's when I saw them. Two people wearing HOA badges were standing on my property, inside my yard, past the fence line, as if they belonged there. One of them held a clipboard. The other had a phone angled like a camera. They weren't near the sidewalk. They weren't at the front door. They were already in the backyard area, scanning the side of my home and pointing at things like they were evaluating a job site. For a second, I genuinely thought there had to be some explanation. An emergency, maybe. A burst pipe. A downed power line. Something that would justify stepping onto private property without asking. I even told myself that maybe they were looking for a stray animal or responding to a complaint about a safety issue. But the more I watched, the clearer it became. They were inspecting. Calmly. Casually. Like it was routine. I live in an HOA community where rules are strict but predictable. Lawns must be trimmed. Trash cans must be hidden. Exterior changes have to be approved. I'm not new to that. I've lived here long enough to know what they care about and what they ignore. Most of the time, if the HOA has an issue, you get a letter, a warning, a request to fix something by a deadline. What I had never seen, what no one ever explained clearly, was the idea that the HOA could simply enter private property without permission. Yet there they were. I stepped outside, stayed calm, and asked what they were doing. One of them looked up, barely surprised, and told me they were conducting a routine compliance inspection. On my property. I asked who authorized it. They exchanged a glance. Then the one with the clipboard said the HOA had the right to inspect. I asked a simple follow-up question. Right to inspect from where? He didn't answer directly. He just repeated that they had the right. I told them they needed to leave my yard. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't threatening. I just stated it clearly. This is private property. You don't have permission to be back here. They hesitated. And that hesitation told me more than their words did. The person with the phone lowered it slightly, as if they suddenly realized the optics weren't great. Then the clipboard guy said they would finish quickly, that it would only take a minute, that they were almost done. The tone was polite, but it wasn't respectful. It was the tone of someone used to people backing down. I repeated myself. No. Leave. They finally walked toward the gate, but not before taking one last photo of the sidewall and the area near the fence. And as they passed me, one of them said something that stuck with me. You should really read your documents. It was meant as a flex, a reminder of power, but it became the reason they lost control of the situation. After they left, I didn't calm down. I got quieter, focused, because what happened wasn't just annoying, it was a line being tested. I replayed the scene in my head, step by step. They never knocked. They never called. They never announced themselves. They didn't claim an emergency. They didn't even try to pretend they had permission. They simply entered, assuming I'd accept it. And I knew something else. If they did it to me, they'd done it to others. So I documented everything immediately. Time, date, description, where they were standing, what they photographed. I wrote it down while it was fresh, because I've learned that in HOA conflicts, details matter. People forget. Boards deny. Management can't confirm. Then I pulled out the HOA governing documents. This time I didn't skim. I read carefully, slowly, like I was looking for a trap. The CC and RS described the HOA's authority over common areas. The bylaws covered enforcement, meetings, and procedures. There were sections about architectural review and compliance. There were clauses about inspections, but when I got to that part, the wording mattered. The HOA could inspect common areas. The HOA could request access in certain situations. The HOA could address violations that were visible from public view. But nowhere did it clearly state that the HOA could enter private property without consent, unless there was a true emergency. And this was not an emergency. No fire.
No flooding. No structural collapse. No immediate danger.
Just an inspection. So I sent a formal notice to the HOA board and the management company. Not an emotional email, an official letter. I stated that unauthorized entry onto my property had occurred, that no permission had been given, that no emergency existed, and that any future entry would be considered trespassing. I kept the language clean and factual. Then I waited. 2 days later, their response arrived. They claimed they were acting within their authority.
No citation.
No section number. No reference to any document. Just confidence. That's when I realized the pattern. They weren't relying on rules. They were relying on intimidation. If they sounded certain, most homeowners would assume they were right. So I replied with one line of pressure. Please identify the exact governing document section that grants the HOA the right to enter private property without owner consent for routine compliance inspections. Then I stopped talking. Silence. A week passed. And in that week, something interesting happened. Nothing. No follow-up. No more routine inspections. No more surprise visits. It was as if the entire idea suddenly evaporated. Then another letter arrived, and the tone was different. Now they said there had been a misunderstanding. They said inspections would be conducted with notice going forward. They emphasized they were only trying to maintain community standards. They avoided the word enter. They avoided the word permission. They avoided the word trespass.
No επάλεγη. No admission.
Just a soft retreat. But the most important part wasn't what they said. It was what they stopped doing. They never stepped into my yard again. And that's the lesson most homeowners don't hear until it happens to them. Many HOAs operate on assumed power. They rely on the fact that people don't know where the limits are. If no one challenges a behavior, it becomes normal. If no one asks for documentation, it becomes policy. In this case, entering private property without permission wasn't just inappropriate. It was a legal risk, a liability risk, a conflict they didn't want on record. Because the moment I asked for the document section, the behavior ended. This was never about compliance. It was about boundaries. And once those boundaries were enforced, the problem disappeared.